just going to say a few words first, and thank you, Brian. Indeed, I remember those days very well. In fact, it's the first time I went to India was in 1969, and so I've been back many, many times since then. And when you mention that house, that wonderful house, I recall it very well because I was kind of hitchhiking around India at that time, and I ended up on the doorstep of Landon and Jeff Pearson, and they opened the door and were rather surprised to see me. And I said, I'm wondering whether or not you have a spare bed anywhere. And they took me in. And so we have remained close friends ever since, as have with many, many of our external affairs staff who have been there since that time. In fact, I just came away from spending a couple of days with David Malone on my way home. So this business of being associated with India goes back a long time, and I have some great memories of it. But today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite parts of India, and I've been, pretty well all over India. There may be the odd state that I haven't been in, but I've gone from Ladakh all the way to the Seven Sisters in the east, and Kanyakumari in the south, and to Gujarat following the great earthquake there, and so pretty well all across India. But today I want to talk to you about Arunachal Pradesh. And I'd like to ask first, how many of you have ever been to Arunachal Pradesh? Oh, quite a few. Well, that's great, because a lot of people, even in India, don't know where Arunachal Pradesh is. And so I have to keep reminding those in New Delhi that it's a very active state, very beautiful state, and they should be paying far more attention to it. That comes to me from the people whom I meet in the state legislature there. But I want to just tell you, for those of you who don't know it so well, I just want to tell you, and I will show you maps to give you an idea of this, but it's one of what is called the Seven Sisters of the East, in the northeast of India. And when you look at the way that that northeast collection of states is connected to India, it's just by a narrow ribbon of land that keeps it as part of India. It's really, when I look at what surrounds Arunachal Pradesh, you can see that it's surrounded by Bhutan on one side, Assam on the other. You can't get from one place to another in Arunachal Pradesh just by driving through it. You have to come out each time and go into Assam and find another road to go back in. So it's really stuck off there way by itself. It's, as I say, has Bhutan, then Tibet, and then right across the northern part is actually China itself. And it's through that area that China invaded Arunachal Pradesh, or the northeast, in 1962. And they came in, and they pretty well then met with very little resistance. And they came, stayed for a few weeks, and went back home. And I think it was just to show they could do it. But it's been difficult to get into Arunachal Pradesh ever since, because you have to have a special permit to go there, and an inland permit, and so on. But it is one of the most beautiful parts of Arunachal Pradesh. The name of it, Arunachal Pradesh, it means land of the rising sun, or what I like even more, it's called land of the dawn-lit mountains. And I think that's such a lovely description. And now the main part of the economy would be agriculture, I suppose. It is considered agriculture at this point. And agriculture would depend on what you can produce there, which isn't a great variety. But it really is, you know, rice and millet and maize and some wheat and pulses, those things. That's what people manage to make their livelihood of. But if you look beyond that to the potential of Arunachal Pradesh, I think that it's 70% of the land is covered by forests. So you can see that there could be a lot done in the forest industry. But one has to be very careful about the environment in that particular state. One of the reasons is that this is the eastern extension of the Himalaya. And that part of the country is still very unstable because the Himalayan mountains are still growing. And we've seen in the past how a lot of difficulty can emerge because of the instability of the land. The other thing is that a lot of the rest of India and other countries are eyeing the hydro potential of Arunachal Pradesh. And I have even heard some years ago where Canadian firms were out there speculating as to what could be done and recommending giant dams be installed. I mean, can you imagine in such an unstable landmass? There are plans going ahead for much more hydro development, but it is being done with small dams over distances so as to utilize the water in the best possible way without disturbing the fragility of the land or disrupting the environment. So those are some of the things I just wanted to mention about Arunachal Pradesh. One of the things is that it is tremendously varied in the makeup of its people. There are something like, I think I wrote down, 20 major collective tribes and about 70 others. And so they all have their own dialects or languages. In fact, I was in one village not long ago, Lispa, which has a population of 1,200 people, and it has its own language, which nobody else understands. So they just talk to one another all the time. But this shows the incredible richness and diversity of the culture, of the language, of the behavior of the peoples. And what I want to do is to go through very quickly a number of slides that I have just taken, or pictures that I have just taken on my most recent trip. And when I say this, I want you to know that I only have been back a very short time, and to try to get them all scanned and put into the computer and then mounted into a PowerPoint presentation took me most of the time the last 2 days. And I'm not sure I've got them in any kind of proper order. So I will apologize for the way in which they're put together, and I'll try to explain them as best I can. I might also say that that I carry several cameras each time, but 2 of them got used up very early on because of the number of pictures that I was taking. And so the final one, which is in which I use film, doesn't have the same clarity as the first 2. So you will see a kind of change in the way that the pictures look. Anyway, that's my lengthy introduction, and now I'm going to show you something in these pictures, and I'm going to sit down to do that because I have to use the computer. But anyway, this is Arunachal Pradesh, and it's my favorite part of India. Now, first we could go over the weights. What I want you to note about
We need
this,
the light there.
I've used
We
a
need that
couple
light.
of slides to give you an idea of where Arunachal Pradesh is. And you can see when I mentioned that rather narrow link that attaches the northeast states to the whole of India. And Arunachal Pradesh is the last one, way up there at the top. It's one of the larger states, and it has tremendous resources which are yet to really be distinguished. Now this is Arunachal Pradesh. You'll see the Brahmaputra River, which comes down through a variety of channels from the Sangpo River in Tibet and makes that great turn and then comes down through the Dirang, the Siam, a whole series of rivers. I may say that several times that I have gone up to Arunachal, I have gone from Guwahati, the capital of Assam, but we do it in a little zodiac. And four of us pile ourselves and our luggage into this little zodiac and zoom up the middle of the Brahmaputra, but it's about 300 kilometers. So we sleep on the riverbanks at night and hope that nothing trips over us later. But it's going up the Brahmaputra like that, you see such tremendous collections of birds, for instance, because it is a natural flight path for birds from all over Eastern Asia. But it's also full of sandbars. And I know that we have been zooming along, passing all of the barges being towed up, and suddenly strike a sandbar and go flying into the river. But those are the things that happen when you're not watching the channels carefully. So you can see where that is. It sweeps around Bangladesh. The interesting thing about Arunachal Pradesh is that it is very stable. Most of the other northeastern states have a degree, to some extent or another, of insurgency. But Arunachal Pradesh, which is a population of just over 1 million people in that big landmass, is really quite a stable and very active practicing democratic state. And you can see that it's surrounded by Tibet, by China, by Burma, and by some of the other northeastern states. Now, what I'm going to do is run through these pictures very quickly and show you the variety of scenery that you will see in a place in this county, because it goes from the highest mountains, in some of them are, getting up to 6,000 meters, the mountains, and then coming down to almost tropical countryside. And so I'm just going to run through these quickly so you get an idea of what it's like. That was the post at the end of a building I was climbing into. But all of this is in a beautiful land, and where possible, it is cultivated. And everywhere you go, there are waterfalls. I was fortunate on this one. One of my friends, whom some of you in foreign affairs or CEDA may know, Jean Perlin, who now lives in Geneva, was with me, and for at least the first part of it. So we were busy experimenting. And this whole northern part of Arunachal Pradesh is almost exclusively Buddhist. People who have come over from Tibet centuries ago. So you'll see the prayer flags going up the mountains everywhere. And also you'll see lamas and always offerings of prayers. But wherever you get to this height, you come across yaks and all sorts of animals. Now this is the entrance to the Silla Pass, and that is en route to Tawang, which is the northwestern part of Arunachal Pradesh. And one of the things about the Silla Pass, it's about almost 14,000 feet. You go beyond that and you're getting up to 16,000 feet, which is, you know, you're getting into a fairly rarefied atmosphere. And I was glad to have my gloves and my woolen hat. And so then I decided, well, I'd better tie some of the prayer flags along the road, particularly in places which are known to be holy ground. I have a friend who spends her time teaching in Dharamsala. She's teaching English to Tibetan students there. And so she had these prayer flags, and she said, would you mind taking them to a place in northeastern India where you can tie them on and send my prayers with them? So that's what we were doing. And everywhere you see these great waterfalls. And jungle. I mean, literally trying to get through this on foot is not easy. But you can see as you come down that more and more agricultural development takes place. And that is, again, one of the holiest places. And it almost looks like a man's face carved into the rock. But when we're getting down, you'll see all sorts of wonderful trees and plants. And then you get down to the rice paddies, and there is so much of it. And fish ponds. Now, the other thing I want to show you is what a number of the people, the activities that they're involved in. And there is such a variety, but it's also they're hard-working people, and they don't take anything for granted. And one of the things you'll find is that the roads are almost constantly under repair. They need to be, and it's usually the women who are doing it. Now, you can see that wall there. That's built to try and protect the mountains from sliding down. It had happened along one of the roads, one of the main roads, and so they had to rebuild this. And you can see how they're putting that rock in and cement and so on, to keep the road from collapsing entirely. Now that, tucked away in the mountains, is the only nunnery I found. So I went to it first, because I was interested to see what the nuns do in this gompa. And they are always working. Here they're making, well, I guess it was just pounding seeds of one kind or another. And there I was introduced to one of the sisters the nuns who had been retired. And now they have a place in their home, in their monastery, for retired people, and they look after them all the time. And it's wonderful, this caring spirit that they have. Now, mind you, I have to have someone to help me communicate, but this lady talked to me about her life in the nunnery, and then wanted to let me know that she was 78. And I said, I've got you beat, I'm 80. And here they are gathering, these were vegetables that they were putting in bags and then storing away for use during the winter. Now, this is, as I say, one of the ways that the women work on these roads. I was just amazed that everywhere I went, it seemed to be that the women were doing much of the hard work on the roads. And always, wherever you go, you may be working at something, you may be carrying rocks, but alongside of you will be a child and another child and so on. And I suppose this was one of the problems that I had going back to Arunachal this time, and I've been there many times now. But I saw more signs of malnutrition this time than I had previously. Now, when you get down toward the bottom, the luxuriousness of the flowers, and everywhere, you know, and people's houses are filled with them. And when they're not using flowers to decorate their homes, they're using corn. I couldn't quite get over that. But anyway, it's very pretty. This was one of the priests, the Lamas, who was with us, Lama Dom, who was a great help. And the other thing that you see, the people spreading out the crops, particularly the millet along the roads, so that cars will drive over them and crush them and make it so much easier for them to get down to the final area where they can. And everybody works on it. Now, I was intrigued by these people who were bringing their goats and great masses of them right down through the villages. I mean, they were following old trails. Now, the fact that the village had sprung up somewhere along that route didn't make any difference. They went right through the village along the old trails and out the other side and on their way to wherever the market was. Now, when we were getting down, we came across this kind of thing where they have nurseries of medicinal plants. And so you can go into these and find where these medicinal plants are being collected. And again, it's a very good operation because those are used as natural herbs for curing all sorts of medicines. And I think that's a better way to do it than some of the medicines we have today. Now, this was a group of people who were all Buddhists, but this was an old pathway they had used to go down to the river to put the bodies of their dead into the river. but they had worn the pathways, so they all came out on a Sunday to collectively, about 70 of them, turned out to collectively rebuild the pathway down and shore up the side of the road above it. Oops. So that's what they were doing, rebuilding that pathway. And then after that, they went up to a quite substantial hill further along where they had a service. First of all, they brought all the people together from around that village, and they discussed what their next project should be. If they were improving that one, what should they do next to help out the community? And I found this idea that here were the people making the decisions, choosing a project, and then getting on with it. So there they were taking logs that they wanted to raise to put their flags on up the top of this mountain. And so we all climbed up there, and oh, I had these in the wrong place, so you'll excuse that. But that was one morning we stopped in to have breakfast somewhere, and this youngster and this mother were helping, making sure we had breakfast. But this was up at the top of this hill, and they had already built a little gompa and once a month, monks from a nearby monastery would come and perform a service there. And so we were able to sit in with them and listen to them. And they did a beautiful service, just that little group, you know, way on the top. Now, the people from down below had also come up, and they had their next project all designed. They were carrying these hand by hand. They passed those rocks all the way up from one to the other till they got enough up there, and now they were going to make a plaza, a little plaza, in front of that gauntlet, so that they could then have somewhere to gather outside. So they were always doing this kind of thing. There you see, they all got together at the end of their work, and they decided, all right, we've done these two things, now what will be our next project? So that the following week they'd come back and do something else. And I just was so impressed by the way that this volunteer group would go out and do these things. Now this, as you probably, somebody would see, is the way that the children there build their own form of entertainment. Not much like the bobsleigh that I used to have, but nevertheless, it goes down the hill. And as many as possible get on it. When the moment that a meal is over, all the pots and pans go out to be washed. And there's water always running from somewhere, so that they just put these pots and pans in. Now, I want to show you, this is where a major operation is taking place on building one of the roads, and you can just see how everybody seems to be involved in it, men, women, and children, as well as machines. But it's awfully hard to get through when you're trying to get past it. And these women who work on this all the time, so often seem to have a baby on their backs. But they're getting the tar ready for the paving of the road. And you can see how that's being done. Not quite the same way we would go about it here, but it makes sure, it ensures that it does get done. And to get those small pieces of rock that go into forming the pavement, the women sit there by the hour breaking rock. This was way up on top of, beyond Sela Pass. up. We were probably about 16,000 feet here, and a group of people had come up for a service and for a picnic, and so they invited us to join them. So we came and had tea with them. Anyway, there they were. And always I like to have my picture taken with some of the older people there, because I want to make sure that they tell me their stories whenever they can, and they have some wonderful stories.
Did they speak English, brother? Did they speak English?
No, I always had someone like this gentleman there who was a Lama, and he would do the translation for me. Someone would help me out always with that kind of thing. One of the things that I was amazed at and was impressed by was the use of bamboo. I mean, bamboo can do anything. They build houses with it. Now, this is the major Gampo or monastery at Tawang. And that's just the outside of it, and each day that we were there, we would climb up to it to see what was going on. And a lot of repair. This is a practicing, ongoing monastery. It has regular services. I know because I got up and went to one at 4 o'clock in the morning. The chanting and so on is held from 4 to 6 every morning. And I made sure I got up there one morning, but I wasn't going to do it every morning like they did. But they're restoring it beautifully. Now that's the major school in connection with the monastery at Tawang. Coming down the road one day, I was intrigued by what these people were doing, so I, of course, had to take a picture of it. And you can see it. And again, it's so interesting, the sort of things they use to, even when they're playing some sort of game, they'll utilize whatever is handy. Now, this is something that I'll come into this now because Gelbang Apong has been the Honorable Chief Minister there for almost 20 years now. There was one break in between when he was defeated but came back again. And his son, who is one of my closest friends, Omar Apong, was briefly a minister in the government in Congress in Delhi at the age of 25. But it was in one of those short-lived governments when there was a lot of change taking place. And he's now back Omar is back in Arunachal Pradesh, but he has since been elected to the legislature. So he's now in the legislature in Arunachal Pradesh, and I would predict he'll become the next chief minister. That would be my betting. Anyway, one of the things that we did was to, when I say we, this is an organization that I chair called Future Generations. It's based in the United States originally, but it comes out of a background that's associated with India. And about 100 years ago, two young people from the Midwest, both of whom were medical graduates, were married and decided that they would go to northern India to work in setting up clinics or orphanages or whatever. and they spent the rest of their lives there. And so their children were born and brought up in northern India, and the only time they'd come back to the United States would be to do their higher education. One of these people, one of the sons, became a medical doctor and went back and joined his parents in northern India and continued the work, but moved on into Nepal, moved the work further into Nepal. And then he became the first head of UNICEF in China and worked with the barefoot doctors there and introduced the health programs to Tibet. So that's why we also, Future Generations also works in Tibet. But one of the things we try to do is to use health and the environment, the health of the planet and the health of the people, to use as interventions to get village people to begin new practices that might help to prevent or whether it's diarrhea or malaria or whatever, to talk to people about how to boil water, how to use certain procedures to prevent diarrhea, whatever. That's what we really talk about, is the environment and health. And one of the things we've always tried to do is to get people to work together. We don't care who they are, what they are, whatever. They must, work together. So one of the things we've been active is in helping to promote this, which was opened by the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh. And it's a World Peace Park. And it sits on the border of Arunachal Pradesh and Bhutan. And it stretches for miles through the mountains of that part of the country. And it's been set aside as a peace park, but a park for developmental purposes with regard to protecting the environment. So there we're just looking at where that had taken place. Future Generations has had a very major part in bringing this about. And so there were representatives there at the opening of this from both Bhutan and you can see it stretches on and on all the way across the borders like that. And it will be a nature preserve. One of the things that I found, of course, with these baskets that they weave, and they're so great in the way that they carry them. And in fact, I was given one which I carried home on the plane with me. I put everything else into it and carried it on the plane. Now these people again are helping to build, to create the kind of setting in their own areas that is that will bring peace to the countryside. And I think because of that strong Buddhist Tibetan influence on Arunachal Pradesh, it's one of the reasons why it has remained peaceful. One of the things they have, is the great orchard farms, and they are beautiful beyond description. Now here we have these were the people who had traveled with us. One had been our guide and the other our driver, and they were both so wonderful in the way they helped us out. From then on, I was traveling more or less on my own, and I was looking at different ways of transport. The gathering of great reeds. Oh, and occasionally we did run out of roads, so we took to the rivers. Now these are people whom future generations work with, and men and women. We bring them together and get them to make their work plans so that they can decide how it is they're going to improve the health of their communities and improve the health of the environment around them. I had a couple of rough days in the car, so one of the things, this is going up to zero. And some of you may have been in Zero, but Zero is a very unique place in Arunachal Pradesh. Some years ago, a number of years ago, it was decided that the most beautiful women in Arunachal Pradesh lived in Zero along in these areas. And so men would steal over the mountains from other communities and steal them away. And early on it was decided that they would tattoo their faces so that they wouldn't be considered so beautiful. And that went on until a few years ago. So you can see that some of them, you know, it no longer is done, but it was very much the practice up until about 20 years ago. And people are very proud of what they achieved with the tattooing that took place. Home and Zero are almost entirely built of bamboo. Now here, of course, they're out in the paddy fields. But I came back and a woman said, all right, I'll give you a massage. So I sat down and she decided she could give me a massage. Now, children are increasingly in school. And a number of them don't get to school, it's true. But if they're not in school, they've got to get out and work at the chores. And nothing is more important than gathering wood for the fires. And then when you're not in the rice paddy fields, you're out in the as tea pluckers, and then great tea plantations, tea gardens that stretch. This, of course, shows that the roads still need a lot of work done to them. As I could tell, after wading through that, I figured my feet needed a bit of attention. I don't know if that's a matong. And they are, matongs are very, very special. They're given to brides as part of their dowry, and they are used only in formal occasions when they are sacrificed. But they're not you know, taken for food or anything of that nature. They're looked after. And there is the new kind of building out of bamboo. It's incredible. Now this is where they're building one of the great new parts of the roadway. And always we would have singing and dancing at night. And it was always great to get together with them and listen to the singing. Wherever we went, there were people who would come out to welcome us, get dressed up, insist that we should be wearing galleys? Galleys? Is that what we got the word right? Anyway, it's the skirt. And we have established these learning and doing centers everywhere, where people can come and learn trades and learn various skills. And they do wonderful weaving. The weaving is just superb, and the colors are great. One of the other things we do is to train people in to become what we call village welfare workers. And they have to take training for a month and then update it regularly. And then they are given a certificate and a box with medicines in it and instructions as to what to use, and they become the local health worker for the village. And so they all take great pride in being, you know, having gone through this training and being able to control the box of medicines for the village. And that is another thing that we're now getting into, where we are installing good toilets with proper runoff and proper holding crates and so on, so that, you know, the kind of lack of toilets and then is corrected, because that really has been a disaster. And so we have now taken over helping to run the primary health centers. So all of these things are pretty well what an agency can do just by helping out, not by going in and trying to say, all right, you have to do this because we know better than you do, but calling people together and getting them to talk and getting them to make their own decisions as to what they think needs to be done. Now I'm going to close with this because I want to tell you something about this young woman here. She's a very special friend of mine. Her name is Mima, and I met her some years ago. And she then told me her story, which I have written up in an article. But she was married at the age of 6 and taken off to her husband's household. And she had lost 3 children before she was 20. Her husband had been a drinker. He has since reformed. He has become her greatest supporter, and she has become our leading trainer. And a few years ago, several years ago, some of you may remember, I was awarded the Padma Shri, the only Canadian ever to receive it. And I could take 2 guests with me to the presidential palace. And so I took Oma Kapong, whom I knew could translate for me. And then I asked this young woman, Yuri Mima, to come with me. Now, Mima is from Palin, and she'd never been very far from Palin. She'd been to Itnagar, but she'd not been beyond. But she agreed to come, and the women in Palin got together and made her a brand new tribal outfit for the occasion. And so she came to Itnagar, and then she had to get to Guwahati. And in Guwahati, she had to board a plane to come to New Delhi. Now, she'd never seen a plane before, let alone traveled in one. So she had to get aboard this plane and come to New Delhi. She'd never been in anything larger than Itnagar. And suddenly she arrives in New Delhi with, what, 20 million people in it? And the next day she came with me to the president's palace. And we were able to go around everywhere. And because I was the only foreigner who was receiving the Padma Shri, the press asked if they could have a press conference the next day. And so they came and they, television and radio and so on, and they were asking me lots of questions, but they asked me, well, what is it you really do up there? And I said, well, I said, I could give you a description, but there's a young woman here with me, and she could describe it much better than I can. And so I asked Nima to come up to the microphones and the cameras and to tell them, which she could do in Hindi, what kind of work was carried out in Arunachal Pradesh. And so she came, never had seen a camera before or a microphone or anything. She just took control of it entirely and told them all about the work that was being done. And that night she appeared on national television. So I wanted to end with her story. She is just a fabulous young woman who has really overcome tremendous difficulties and shows the kind of people who really make me want to go back again and again to Arunachal Pradesh. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, me.
You have come across any RME, who's honest person in Arunachal? Who's honest person? You know, people are, I have heard that people are very honest and very
Yes.
good.
Yes.
But if you have come across any kind of thug who may try to give you something like that?
No, but they give me, I'm going to get that word right, gullet. I think it's called the gullet. You know, yeah, that's that, and the basket. Because they were so anxious to see me go around them in the fields. But that's all they.
I see, but they never cheated you.
No.
Yes.
Sorry, I back up to answer questions.
The winter should it not become cold because the high mountain and in the month of January, did you find very cold there?
Yes, it was cold. You know, that is the one thing about going to a place like that, which has such a wide variety of temperatures. You get down to Itnagar or to some of these places, and it's very, very hot during the day. I mean, you know, when I was there in September, October. But then, when you go up to these places, I mean, it is freezing. And particularly you find it when you're crawling in the bed at night. It's you really do find it. I found it very cold.
But it didn't snow there.
It will have now, yes. Yeah. And I was, you know, we saw some of it up beyond the Sela Pass. There was snow on the hills then in the mornings.
What kind of farming these people do?
Just, you know, it's minimal farming. It really focuses on rice, on tea gardens, on maize, you know. And more, the women are learning to plant kitchen gardens so that they can get a variety of vegetables.
You know, the Chinese government had to claim over the Arunachal Pradesh.
Oh, well, they did, you know, they don't
have
recognize
taken
Arunachal Pradesh to this day. They don't recognize it. They consider it a part of Tibet.
Oh, Chinese people.
Yeah. And one of the things that I saw in the papers in India just a few days ago is where, this is one of the reasons why I'm against these great dams. I mean, I've seen the destruction in Egypt caused by the Aswan High Dam and other places. China is running very short of water. And they were saying in the papers the other day, the Chinese were saying, you know, we have been given Tibet, and Tibet will be our salvation. Well, you know, the rivers that come out of Tibet, some of them go into India. And what they're saying is, we're going to dam those rivers and send the water back into China. The river that has really begun to run dry is the Yellow River in the north, and so they want to do engineering feats that will take the rivers. And that is the most frightening thing I've heard.
Are there other questions? I think you had a question.
It's interesting that you brought the subject of water, and I was wishing you did on it. In India, as you know, there is a lot of shortage of water. I don't know the supply or distribution. Is your organization doing anything on it, or are there any organizations doing on it?
Well, I know that the government is very concerned about the water situation, but they also have to. It's very interesting. In the next couple of weeks, the Premier of China is coming for meetings with Manmohan Singh in New Delhi. And I would think that that's going to be one of the chief items for discussion at that time. There has to be an agreement between China and India that the natural flow of waters is not interrupted. And so while we as an organization, which is a small organization, would do our best to make sure that people know about this issue, because it's not known about. You know, I came back and asked several people about it, and they haven't heard about this comments coming out of Beijing. But I think it is important that we make sure that this is an issue that is raised wherever and whenever it can be, by people like me talking about it, by other people, you know, getting the word out that this is not something that can be allowed internationally. It just is a no-starter.
Kate has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Enjoyed your presentation very, very much. I was living it with you. Future generations, your conclusion was a very moving story. And judging from what you've mentioned, future generations takes an integrated approach to health and development, education.
Yeah.
The story of her name is Mima, being transformed and becoming the leader and spokesperson, etc. Does future generations also attempt to look at some of the social issues like child marriage and adolescent pregnancy, and try to have the community in their participative way that you mentioned analyze these practices?
Not, we don't focus outside of the very basic issues that we're involved in, and that is, how do you help prevent or protect the health, particularly of the mother? We go into areas which are almost medieval in the way that they're seen. I do a lot of work of this nature in Afghanistan, and I'm horrified by some of the things I come across. So we try to focus on the way that women are trained, are given opportunity to learn a better approach, so that in places where the maternal infant mortality rate is very high, that you introduce practices that will begin to reduce that. And certainly, Arunachal Pradesh was one where it had been extremely high, And because of the work that has been done over the last 15 years there, that has come down. But we don't get into trying to reform the whole social structure because, yeah, it's just not going to be possible for our small group.
You spoke about noticing over the past 2 years an increase in some malnutrition in the children. Is there any explanation that you might have for that? And is that something that some of this community work?
I think it's the fact that there are too many children. You know, I mean, the rate of population increase. Women will have 12 children. And, you know, when I ask them, but, you know, why not concentrate on 5 and see that, well, what if those 5 die? They'll tell me. Then where would I turn? And so this is a whole state of mind that is going to take a long time to reverse. But it's because I think that there are too many mouths to feed, that the younger ones aren't getting the kind of support they need.
Question here.
What's the basic education the children are getting?
Well, you know, there seems to be a lot of schools. I saw a lot of children in uniform going off to school, but after 3 or 4 years, girls will not continue.
So there's a lot of dropout, basically.
Yeah.
And what's your machine is doing this?
Well, whatever we can to encourage, we're more involved, not in formal education, but in informal education. You know, how can you teach? We think that there is enough support for school systems in India for children to go there. The informal part of it is to teach, to work with mothers, to encourage them to have their children go to school. You know, it's not something where we can go off and lead children to school. It has to come from the family itself. And so most of it is in these learning and doing centers that we have established, where we talk to women about the need for their children to have some kind of education, to make sure that they do have an opportunity to go on. And it's only when you get into these large families that, you know, that begins to break down.
Maybe a question. When you said informal, this is passing on the skills from the grandfather to the children and so on, something like that?
Yes.
Yes. Keeping the tradition, more tradition.
Oh, and we place a great deal of emphasis on the preservation of traditional culture, the basic culture that is so alive and vibrant. I mean, I am always astounded. I'll go somewhere and people will get up, start to sing, but they're singing a song that they're making up as they go along about a visitor has just come to, and I may not quite understand it unless somebody will translate for me. I haven't seen this kind of thing where people can actually stand as a group and someone will be the leader and begin to recite a line and then everybody will repeat it and then it's woven into the next. I mean, that is absolutely beautiful. And so there is a great deal that we try to do to make sure that that continues.
Mr. Rangi had a question.
We had 2 questions here.
There's one here.
Yeah. The mission of your organization is focuses on solving issues with health and the environment. So the way I see that in any part of India, like a duty to towards people are more focused on their personal goals, personal interest, not on the public good kind of thing.
Yeah.
What steps do you take to motivate people to do the positive things? Financing or motivational?
Well, I find it comes from the people themselves. Because the way that we work, we say, all right, you have the energy within yourselves to do things for yourselves. But first of all, you've got to get together and decide what it is you need most, or that you can do together. And we emphasize that do together, because one person saying, all right, I'm going to be able to do it, is not going to make it successful. It's only when a whole community puts their energy into it together that you get something done. And that's what we'll get them together, we'll say, all right, now discuss what you think. And there'll always be lots of argument in it, and that's a good thing. I mean, what I find when you get a community together, a village together like that, is the way when they're sitting in something where they're familiar, where they're with one another, how much the women begin to contribute. They might not do it if they come into a formal meeting, but when they're sitting around with everybody, when they've been singing, when they've been welcoming people, and so on, then they'll all take part. And one of the things I find is that after a good, healthy argument about what should be done, there's a natural inclination to arrive at a consensus. And that's what I guess when you ask about how is this done, it's to really give the people the sense that they can do it themselves. And it's amazing how much they can do. Now, they can't do everything. And we say, all right, the most basic thing is to get the villagers to work together. Then, if there is some expertise needed from outside, we'll try to help provide that. But we also say, you've got to learn to work with government and find out what they're all about, because they're probably going to provide the framework in which you work. So it's a combination of these three groups: the villagers, the outside experts if they're needed, and the government regulations to understand them. And so if you get those three together, you've got a pretty good chance of succeeding.
There's one gentleman who's been very patient.
I was just wondering about the heavy loads they carried in back, the baskets supported on their heads. Sherpas usually, are known to carry this, and had learned somewhere that this forms the neck and shortens the lifespan. There are no mules or donkeys. I didn't see any carrying. Is there any awareness of this? The bands and the head, and then the heavy load at the back. It's supposed to shorten the forms in our and shorten the lifespan. It is known. It's generally known that it causes a lot of medical problems.
Well,
No awareness of this.
no, I didn't see it. Because people, who were older and so on, they still walk so straightly, and, I have no doubt that there must be arthritis. That happens to everybody. I'll tell you that. But no, I never. But they are much shorter people than I am. And you see on those pictures, I stand out like a jolly green giant, sort of thing, because I'm so much taller. But I think this is a question of over time. My mother was much shorter than I am. It's a question you know, generation by generation. And you'll see that children now are growing, you know, much taller. But I must say, every time I look at these people carrying that weight on their, my neck aches for them.
I think we have time for one more question. I'd like to ask Scott. Then we can perhaps chat informally. Perhaps we should have.
Dr. Homer?
Scott, I think is next up.
I was just finding out if people here want to help you or to offer any kind of support to your organization, how they go about doing it.
What is that? Nice. Yeah. Well, one of the things, let me just tell you a bit about future generations. I mentioned, you know, this has been something going back over 100 years in its association with India. But we also work in Tibet, in Afghanistan, and in Peru. Wherever there are high mountains, that's where we'll be. Because these are the places which are least visited by anyone else. They are the most fragile ecology in the world. So we're in these various places. So we have future generations India and future generations Peru and future generations. And I am just forming an organization called Future Generations Canada, because we feel that there should be a way in which we can assist with the work that is being done. And I say we, I mean Canadians, and in many cases, the Indian community in Canada, because this is something which is going to benefit people back in their country. But, so I'm waiting for Revenue Canada to finish putting through the paperwork on that. But the bureaucracy in Canada. But they don't have to make them 5 copies of everything on paper. Just to do
Okay, I think you have one very last question.
Yes, you mentioned that you tell people in Delhi to pay more attention to Arunachal. How much interaction is there between Arunachal and the rest of India? Unlike China, is now just built a railway line to Tibet.
Yes, yes, I know. That's going to disturb a lot of the things. But, you know, a lot of Arunachal Pradesh, a lot of people are illiterate. A lot of people have never been away from Arunachal Pradesh. In many ways, it is an isolated part of the world. Younger people, in fact, not many people ever move away from Arunachal Pradesh. They don't go out. There may be the odd ones that go to university in Delhi, but it's a closed society by and large. What needs to be done is to have much more interaction between the central government and the local legislature in order to begin to bring them much more together than they have been. It's, you know, there's lots I have criticized over the years in the federal system in Canada, but it's not a bad thing to have the Prime Minister and the Premiers meet fairly regularly and listen to what is going on. And I think that's something that India could do to its benefit. You know, that there should be much more interaction. I may say that a young friend of mine who now works in Afghanistan went to, because Future Generations also gives a master's degree in community change and development. And a young man whom I had met here, who was from Afghanistan, I persuaded to go back there and work but he went into this MA program, and one of the first places they visited was northeastern India. And it was his first experience in going anywhere where there was even an example of a federal system. And he was introduced in the month that he spent there in northeastern India. He saw the Panchayat movement. Well, he was very impressed with the way the panchayats were set up and were being trained in the kind of discussion. He went back to Afghanistan, and he decided he was going to copy the panchayat movement and set it up in Afghanistan. Now, he lives in the valley in Bamiyan province. And this is where the giant Buddhists were destroyed, you may remember. Well, his valley in Bamiyan province, the Shaidan Valley, has 75 villages in it. And he knows them all. It's a long valley. He has now got shuras, or local councils, or panchayats, set up in 73 of those 75 valleys. And he attributes it to what he learned in Arunachal Pradesh. And he has the panchayats, the shuras, come together in a grand shura for the whole valley. And they met and they made two decisions. And those two decisions were, there should be no guns allowed in the valley, and there should be no poppies grown. And the UN has come out and taken a look at this, and there's no other example anywhere in Afghanistan of that happening. Because if anybody goes and tries to get around the rules and grows poppies, then the whole local council or panchayat together go pull all the poppies up. And so it's, you know, it's amazing how when you begin to study what happens in one country, you can begin to transplant it in a way to suit your own country. And that's what we keep trying to do, you know, in the work that we do, pass examples on from one to the other.
Well, I think I've come to the end of question period, and I'm sure that Flora would be happy to continue this discussion informally. I'd now like to ask Malti Kesarwani to say a few words of thanks and to make a small presentation.
I hope I don't need it. On behalf of India-Canada Friendship Circle, thank you so much, Ms. MacDonald, for accepting our invitation and coming and speaking to us this evening. Your talk has been most inspiring. Many of us have not been to Arunachal Pradesh and feel inspired and motivated to go there someday. And so on behalf of our organization, I have a token of our appreciation, a small painting from done with the powder made of gemstones, real gemstones. So I hope you will enjoy and remember us. Thank you so much for coming. And I would like to for providing this beautiful facility, and Poonam Behel for catering this evening. And most of all, thank you all of you for coming and supporting us. We will be starting our new session on 1st of April 2007. Don't feel that 1st of April Fool's. No, there will be a program. And our first speaker for 2007 is going to be Anne-Marie Gaston. So please check out our website, do visit it, learn a little bit more about our activities, and do come back and support us. We look forward to seeing you soon again. I have one more announcement to make. On each table, you will see there are 3 pumpkins. This is because it is Thanksgiving and now our Halloween coming. So please help yourself. 3 with each pumpkin. You can take 3 people can take 1 pumpkin each from each table. And Miss MacDonald, you can take all 3. Now we will have some tea. Please enjoy and meet each other and have a fellowship. Thank you.